I've said stupid things. I've done stupid things. I stood on the carpet. I took it like a man.
This is on a par with 2 other difficult votes that I have made. One was to impeach a governor.
He was not, in fact, standing up for the victim, but rather further victimizing this person. At that moment, I decided to change my motion from censure to expel.
And welcome to Sunday Square Off. I'm Bram Resnick. A historic vote on what Arizona House Speaker J.D. Mesnard called a horrifying day. But Mesnard said Representative Don Shooter left him no choice. Shooter was expelled from the House by a vote of 56-3, just the 4th legislator in state history given the boot by his colleagues, and believed to be the first in the country ousted as a result of the Me Too movement to fight sexual harassment. Today we take a closer look at why Shooter was tossed and whether his ouster changes what many have described as the Capitol's culture of harassment. Also on today's show, we're joined by Steve Montenegro. One poll shows him neck and neck with Debbie Lesko in the Republican special primary for the 8th Congressional District seat. Then a Native American lawmaker wants to ban the Redskins, Indians, and Braves names at Arizona sports stadiums. And how real are those 2,000 jobs Governor Ducey announced last week for a new electric truck factory? We'll be verifying it. But first, an investigation found credible evidence that Don Shooter engaged in ugly harassment of women at the Capitol. Shooter's last-minute bid to save his skin by questioning that investigation ultimately cost him his job. Joining us this morning to discuss all that, Rachel Leingang of the Arizona Capitol Times and Chris Hurstum, political analyst. Welcome to you both. Rachel, you and your colleague Katie Campbell broke the story last November of more than a half dozen women at the Capitol, lobbyists and legislators, alleging they were sexually harassed by Don Shooter. The investigation is complete. Shooter is gone. Do they believe they were heard? Do they believe they've gotten justice?
I've spoken to some of the women involved and then some other female lobbyists as well, and it's sort of a mixed bag. He did experience consequences in a way that we haven't seen in 27 years. Very extreme consequences, obviously, really rare, and his colleagues in his party chose to oust him, which is obviously a really big deal. But the report, it put a lot of women through a lot of pain. There was a lot of expectation of finding evidence, receipts from 5 years ago, really high bar that, attorneys have a pretty high bar as they should, but I think some women read that report and thought, why should I put myself through this, and put my name out there and put my profession on the line, basically, when it was unclear for several days if there would be a consequence.
So you're saying the consequences kind of justifies what they went through? Is that the feeling?
Maybe it's tough to say, really. Your name's in the newspaper for this one thing, and when people Google your name, this is probably the one thing that comes up, and it's still a really tough calculus for a lot of people if that's worth it.
Very interesting. Chris, we heard from Representative Layla Alston at the start of the show describe this expulsion vote as one of the toughest votes since she had to vote to oust Governor Evan Mecham. You were a state legislator. Describe that. How tough, how tense was it in there yesterday?
Well, it was extremely tense, but there was a difference. When we impeached and then the Senate convicted Ev Mecham, a sitting Republican governor, that was because of crimes that he had committed against the state. You were judging somebody not in your own chambers. To me, it was, and there was hearings that went on for weeks, and reports by attorneys and so forth. There was much more of a foundation when we voted. This was a different situation because you had members themselves, heroines in my opinion, the women that came forward, put their reputations on the line and blew the whistle on their male colleagues, in this case Don Shooter, and you were having to judge your own seatmates, people that you sat next to on the floor and so forth. So I think that added to the emotion and the tension that was felt on Thursday.
And it's interesting, I think you alluded to this, you didn't quite get the clarity you might get in a court case with evidence and that kind of thing. And then at the last minute on the day of the the vote, Don Shooter, trying to save his own skin, just seemed to hang himself with an email to colleagues early in the morning, trying to scare them away. What do you make of Shooter's behavior that day and through all this?
Well, Shooter's behavior has been in question ever since he's been in the legislature. I mean, his drinking problem is severe. Everybody's known that.
That's a pretty strong statement there.
Well, I'm just saying, anybody that went to legislative receptions and so forth, it was a constant problem. The alcohol problem was very real. Even if you didn't plug in the sexual harassment and the bullying that has been exposed now. I question the leadership, frankly, in both chambers. The presidents of the Senate, not the current one, President Biggs, that appointed Shooter to the powerful appropriations chair. The current Speaker of the House, Mesnard, who appointed, when he flipped over to the House, to the appropriations chairmanship. That enabled him. That gave him even more power and allowed him to have even more of a free rein, I think, to try to bully and sexually harass, and may have even contributed to his drinking problem. So I'm not ready to let leadership off the hook on this. And one other thing, there are heroines, women that stood up to the sexual harassment. Bravo. But I don't know of one male elected official at the state capitol that until just an hour and a half before they took the vote ever called for Don Shooter to be expelled. And I think that's an issue.
Neither did J.D. Mesnard, and he changed his mind at the last minute.
And I think he could feel the tide because Kelly Townsend and the women who had rallied and were on the floor together, Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, and progressives, they got the job done, not the men at the Capitol.
The letter really, a lot of people, when they made their votes, they cited this letter as someone who didn't show remorse, who was still trying to deflect from what he'd done and say, you know, what about this? Instead of really genuinely apologizing. You know, Townsend had mentioned, Representative Townsend had mentioned the day before when she said, you know, please resign or we'll do a vote. She had mentioned that throughout the report, he didn't ever really say, I'm sorry. The things that he said, he joked off, he laughed about. He said, yeah, you know, I'm known for this. I'm a class clown. This is, you know, my personality. 80% of my jokes land. People think I'm funny most of the time. But there was a missing apology throughout a lot of this.
And that was the email he sent, again, the morning of the vote that flipped J.D. Mesnard, because from censure to expulsion, we could have been sitting here talking today about a censure. I mean, it really was that close, wasn't it?
Right. The letter, like I said, several of his friends said this letter was a really bad decision that he made.
It was outrageous, truly was. Okay, so the big question, where does the legislature go from here? Is this the dawn of a new day, or, as you said, there's still an intimidation factor? Power politics may never go away. What's changed? What's changed?
It's tough to say, really. I mean, a lot of women were very brave in this. That's obviously clear, but like Chris had alluded to, this is something that's been known for quite some time. This is someone who, there were a lot of women who are willing to come out against it. You know, what if you're the only one? Are you willing to put yourself out there against someone who isn't known for this persona? It's a lot harder to decide if it's worth going forward. You know, and this is a cultural issue in all industries and, you know,
including
across
politics.
the nation. Yeah, so.
Chris, what's changed?
Well, I think the Me Too movement, frankly, has changed, hopefully, the corporate world, which is just as much at blame in their own environment as the media world, as the political world as well. I think what has happened is because the heroines, the women, came forward and were willing to blow the whistle on Don Shooter, I think a lot of guys that have participated in bullying and sexual harassment in the past that are still down there at the state capitol, they're going to think twice now because they're going to see what happened and they're going to be scared politically to be caught. And if nothing else, that's a good thing.
Well, and ideally their colleagues know now to tell them to knock it off and speak up.
All right. Chris Hurstum, Rachel Leingang, thanks so much for joining us. When we come back, my conversation with Steve Montenegro, Republican candidate in the West Valley's 8th Congressional District. Plus, a Native American lawmaker on his bill to ban team names like the Redskins at Arizona sports stadiums. And how real are those big jobs numbers Governor Doug Ducey is touting for a new electric car plant? We verify it. Stay with us.